Studies Unit 5th Annual Conference. My name is Dr. Laila Omar. I'm a researcher here at the Arab Center, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this panel today. So this is the 5th panel of the conference. It's entitled Ideology and Resistance in Iran's Security Doctrine. So we have 3 brilliant speakers among us today. We have Dr. Mohammad Homayounvash, who is joining us on Zoom today. We have Dr. Mohammad Kalantari, and we have Dr. Ahmed Abozaid. They will all present their research, and then I really look forward to the conversation and the discussion we're going to have at the end. So I just want to mention a few quick points. So each speaker will have 15 minutes, like all the other panels. I will let you know when you have 5 minutes left. And then we will open the floor for questions. And I would like to ask the audience to please ask concise, specific questions so that we can have as many as, we can take as many questions as we can and keep the conversation going. And we're right before lunch, so we'll be mindful of time, of course, not to keep you waiting for so long. So again, this is why also we should have, specific and brief questions. So our first speaker is Dr. Mohammad Homayounvash. He is the founding director of the Jaffer Institute for Interfaith Dialogue and Education at Miami-Dade College, who also lectures in international relations at the University of Miami and Florida International University. He holds a PhD in international relations from FIU. He is the author of Iran and the Nuclear Question, History and Evolutionary Trajectory, published in 2017, a critical examination of Iran's nuclear diplomacy within the broader context of international non-proliferation regimes. His current research explores the geopolitical and ethical implications of artificial intelligence, algorithmic governance, and digital sovereignty in the global south, with emphasis on the Muslim world. And his presentation or paper is titled Resistance Ethos in Iran's Strategic Culture, Quranic, Shi'i, and Constitutional Underpinnings. So Dr. Mohammad, are you with us? You can start, and you have 15 minutes. Perfect. So you have 15 minutes.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Leila, and I'm very happy to be joining you guys, although over Zoom. Hopefully, I could be there in person at some point as well in the future. So I decided to take more of a theoretical dive into the question of resistance with this paper. And the primary question is how Iran's ethos of resistance, as I call it, shapes strategic culture. So my big argument is that ethos of resistance is essentially the organizing principle of Iran's strategic culture. And I chose this perspective because it's my belief that rather than reducing Iran's behavior to rational calculations of power balancing, it's perhaps more illuminating to ask how Iran's identity, theology, and history generate structured doctrine of resistance. So the guiding question is, what does resistance mean in Iran's worldview, and how does it shape its strategic culture? And I argue that resistance is not just a policy tool, but a deeply institutionalized doctrinal framework that is rooted in the Quran, in Shia memory, and Iran's constitutional order. Now, why strategic culture? Now, mainstream theories like realism and rational choice and game theory emphasize material power, interests, and cost-benefit calculations. While useful, they often ignore how religious beliefs, historical memory, and normative commitments shape state behavior. So strategic culture, by contrast, focuses mostly on the ideational context of behavior, those deep-seated assumptions, norms, and historical experiences that guide actors, essentially. So for Iran, the ethos of resistance, or muqawama, is not an optional discourse, from my perspective, but a constitutive identity marker. It structures perceptions of threat, legitimacy, and it informs strategy. So by exploring Iran through the lens of strategic culture, we can uncover those deeper foundations of its foreign policy beyond mere, material calculus. The core thesis of my argument is pretty straightforward, that resistance in Iran is not rhetorical flourish or short-term reaction. It is structured doctrine with clear theological and political underpinnings. Its roots are threefold from my perspective: Quranic injunctions that prohibit domination and mandate justice, Shia historical paradigms that valorize and validate defiance and endurance, and finally, the Iranian constitution, which codifies resistance as a legal and political obligation. So together, these three pillars create an organizing principle for Tehran's foreign policy. In that sense, resistance operates both as a normative commitment, but also as a strategic compass that together shape Iran's identity and behavior in the international system writ large. So I go to through those pillars very quickly. I know I don't have more than 15 minutes. So first, let's talk a little bit about the Quran. So the Quran provides sort of the first layer of Iran's resistance doctrine. The principle of Nafy Sabil, which you hear quite frequently in the context of Iran's doctrine of resistance. This is derived from Quran, from chapter 4, verse 141, which essentially prohibits granting disbelievers any authority over believers, and it sets strategic directive against subordination, in summary. There are other verses in the Quran that emphasize the duty to resist oppression, defend the vulnerable, and establish justice. Verse, I think, 60 of chapter 6 commands preparedness, justifying emphasis on deterrence and self-reliance. There's another verse that sacralizes patience and restraints, and that balances militancy and military preparedness with prudence. So these verses, taken all together, supply both the ethical justification and the operational logic that structured Iran's ethos of resistance. Then I take a deeper dive into Shia paradigms in my paper, which in my belief supply the symbolic grammar of resistance. So here we have the story of Karbala and the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, which from Iran's perspective acts as the archetype of uncompromising defiance against tyranny. Then you also have the peace treaty of Imam Hassan with Muawiyah. And from Iran's perspective, that peace treaty demonstrates the necessity of strategic restraint when conditions demand it. So this was later theorized as heroic flexibility by Ayatollah Khamenei. And then you also have Imam Ali's injunction to be the enemy of oppressors and helper of the oppressed, which universalizes resistance beyond sectarian lines. So together, these paradigms institutionalize a dual ethos of being steadfast, but also being prudent in Shia strategic culture. When we look at the Iranian constitution that was ratified in 1979, it embeds resistance directly into Iran's state identity. For example, Article 152 commits the Islamic Republic, to reject domination and submission in its foreign policy, while Article 154 declares support for liberation movements of the oppressed on a worldwide scale. So these provisions transform resistance from a rhetorical slogan into almost a juridical obligation. They also link domestic legitimacy to the defense of independence and global justice. And in summary, resistance from this constitutional perspective becomes not simply one strategic option among many others, but the very criterion of political fidelity to the Islamic Republic's founding principles. And it ensures doctrinal continuity across leadership generations and the different political contexts. Then in the paper, I also talk a little bit about strategic depth and the axis of resistance. So operationally, Iran translates this ethos and this doctrine of resistance into deterrence and regional alliances. Ayatollah Khamenei has articulated 5 pillars of resistance strategy, and they include preserving dignity, ensuring its efficacy, its groundedness in realism, its cultivation of what he calls Quranic confidence, and also having consideration for its feasibility. So strategic depth here is not just about expanding borders, but about cultivating ideological and relational depth and creating alliances and movements that share a commitment to resisting hegemony and bullying. So the axis of resistance from this perspective is less a proxy network and more a counter-hegemonic security community, if you will. And you could make the argument that from a strategic perspective, it provides Iran with resilience against isolation and sort of embodies the collective enactment of resistance across multiple geographies. Then you have the concept of strategic patience and flexibility when you analyze Iran's foreign policy. And a common misconception is that resistance implies unending confrontation. But in practice, Iran's resistance doctrine balances defiance with strategic patience. So the concept of strategic patience reflects a willingness to absorb pressure, for example, economic sanctions, and delays in achieving objectives while holding fast to long-term goals. Complementing this notion of resistance and strategic patience is the notion of heroic flexibility, a term that's been used multiple times by Khamenei to describe tactical compromise when it strengthens rather than undermines principled resistance. So together, these two concepts allow Iran to adapt pragmatically to shifting conditions without looking like it's capitulating to hegemonic demands, and thereby maintaining both ideological integrity and operational resistance in their national system. So overall, the theoretical contribution of this paper is that Iran exemplifies what a constructivist might call a norm entrepreneur in the international system. So through its ethos of resistance, it seeks to redefine key categories of international relations like justice, sovereignty, and legitimacy in ways that challenge Western-centric assumptions. So sovereignty here is framed not merely as state autonomy, but as liberation from domination. Justice becomes both a domestic and global obligation. Religion in this model is not a residual cultural factor, but a core variable that helps shape strategic behavior. And this case, Iran's case, expands the field of strategic culture, demonstrating how theological commitments generate durable and coherent foreign policy orientations. And in conclusion, and I'll just finish on this, Iran's ethos of resistance is best understood, as I mentioned, as a three-dimensional doctrine. So ontologically, it defines the identity of the Islamic Republic, a state that sees surrender as existential betrayal. Normatively, it is rooted in Quranic injunctions, Shia paradigms, and constitutional commitments. And strategically, it manifests in the way Iran internalizes deterrence, its alliances, and resilience under pressure and duress. So resistance is not just reactionary or episodic or haphazard, but in a way, a civilizational project that is shaping Iran's engagement with the international system and the world out there. And to understand Iran's foreign policy, one must see resistance not as just rhetoric, but as the theological, political core of its strategic culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammad. This was very fascinating, and thank you for also speaking within the time limit. So our second speaker is Dr. Mohammad Kalantari. He is Associate Professor of International Relations and Director of the Center for Islamic and West Asian Studies at Royal Holloway, University of London, and serves as Associate Editor of the British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies. His research focuses on the international politics of the Middle East, especially political Islam, Shia Islam, and transnational political networks. He employs historical sociology and network analysis to examine clerical authority, identity formation, and regional power relations. He is the author of The Clergy and the Modern Middle East, Shia Political Activism in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon, published in 2021. His paper is entitled The Security Dilemma of Influence, Shiite Transnationalism, and the Limits of Iranian Foreign Policy. The floor is yours, Dr.
Great to be with you. Yeah, I'm not going to start that way. But let me begin with a reference to a now very famous speech from Major General Ghulam Ali Rashid. In September 2021, he recalled what Qasem Soleimani, before his own assassination, described that the martyr general had basically told his colleague that we built 6 popular ideational armies stretching from Iran to the Mediterranean, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, along with Islamic Jihad, allied forces in Syria. And I remember at the time I was watching this in Iranian news broadcasting, this Major General talking about this, and it was giving me chilling sort of shivers, that why, even if it is true, why you are broadcasting it. And General Rashid presented this as the architecture of deterrence itself. Yet when war came in June 2025, that wall didn't defend Iran, and Rashid himself was assassinated in the very first days of the June war, and what had been projected as reassurance revealed its exhaustion. And this is, I think, the beginning of my paper, and my main argument, which, as I was listening to Mohammad presentation, goes very hand in hand, because he was talking about how resistance is this ontological for Iran. I'm trying to, throughout my presentation and in more depth in my paper, to explain what is that ontological trap which Iran is confined with and why it doesn't work. So this paradox is the subject of my paper. Iran's foreign policy, once a source of ontological reassurance, now generate chronic insecurity. So I explain this through 2 concepts as articulate that as I could be in 15 minutes and or 10 minutes now. You know, if you want to read more, I refer you to my paper. And obviously the security dilemma of influence. And this helps us to see why identity routines meant to reassure have instead become self-defeating. So, yeah, is it working? Through the language of Shi'i solidarity and resistance, the post-revolutionary state established its identity. In the 1980s, as you know, support for Hezbollah against Israel was not only a regional strategy, it anchored its claim to defend the oppressed and positions Iran as the center of transnational movement. And this gave Tehran a moral standing that resonated on the Arab street, and it threatened its revolutionary narrative. But these practices were not marginal. They helped to affirm the state's identity both domestically and internationally. Those very routines generate, as well as we all have seen yesterday and today, chronic insecurity. Regionally, and of course inside Iran itself, public expectations have shifted. Protesters increasingly question the cost of transnational commitments. Chants like "Not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life" for Iran have become so pervasive among Iranians going to the street that they now form a well-known cliché within the dissent lexicon. And this captures a deeper sentiment. External projection is no longer aligned with national priorities. Instead of grounding identity, the routines of resistance produce alienation and fragility. And the question then is not simply why Iran has lost popularity. The deeper power is structural. Why do practices designed to affirm identity now undermine it? Why do the same routines that once stabilized the post-revolutionary state's sense of self now produces contestation and chronic instability at home and across the region? And this is the paradox I describe as the ontological trap. So in recent years, security studies has devoted increasing attention to Iran. Much of this work, as you've again heard yesterday and today, has focused on material strategy, balancing against superiority of US and Israel, compensating for sanctions through asymmetric warfare, or building deterrence through missiles and drones. Another body of work has examined Iran's regional networks primarily as instrument of proxy warfare or forward defense. And these studies have deepened our understanding. We needed those studies. But they tend to treat identity as a secondary or symbolic factor. The problem with this approach is that it cannot fully explain persistence. Material accounts show why Iran sought influence, but they struggle to explain why the state continues to invest in transnational projection, even when the cost outweigh the benefits. They can account for power balancing or strategic hedging, but not for the paradoxical endurance of practices that seem to undermine Iran's own security. So my framework addresses this gap by placing identity routines at the center of the analysis. Ontological security theory begins from a very simple claim. So realists quite famously believe that the very aim and very goal of every state as unit of analysis in international relations is survival. But ontological security theory begins with the fact that the state seeks more than survival. They seek continuity of self. So Giddens introduced the idea in sociology. Later on in IR, scholars like Jennifer Metzen or Brent Steele showed how states rely on a stable relationship and repeated practices to sustain a coherent self. Even conflict in their idea can become reassuring when it is familiar. So we see this, for example, after 9/11, just to try to explain what ontological security means. When the United States sought safety through a narrative of open-ended vigilance, new security routines at home, and a far-reaching war on terror abroad were not only instrumental for the US, they affirmed an image of the US as a guarantor of international order. So over time, some of these routines produce fatigue and contradiction, yet many endured because they anchored identity for the US. So all the idea or the narratives in the media about billions or trillions that has been spent by US in Afghanistan or Iraq, the ontological security basically justifies that because it said that it goes and resonates with the identity which US wanted to project. So the theory also warns that routines can outlive their usefulness. What reassures decision makers can alienate societies and provoke others. And this is where the literature introduced ontological dissonance. States live with clashing identity imperatives, but by juggling scripts and narratives. And Iran fits this broader pattern, but with distinct feature. As I argue in my paper, the post-revolutionary state built a repertoire that fused Shi'i solidarity with resistance to Israel and Western dominance. So supporting Hezbollah, cultivating ties with Palestinian groups, and embedding network across Iraq, Syria are not only instrumental choices, as Mohammad much more articulately explained in his paper. They were identity practices that anchored a revolutionary self in the 1980s and 1990s. Over time, however, the same routines increasingly produce friction. Domestically, where publics question the cost of transnational commitment, and regionally, where allies associated with Iran face accusation of corruption or external imposition. Yeah, I think that's. So there is a stark difference between ontological dissonance and ontological trap, and this is what the literature, when they talk about ontological dissonance, they define it as the ability to juggle competing narratives in order to preserve continuity of state. Contradictions are not necessarily fatal in that sense. They can be managed. So the Nebani's case and Iran illustrated quite nicely. In the 1980s, Iran projected a narrative of Shi'i revolutionary solidarity through Hezbollah, while simultaneously at the time trying to undermine Amal, another Shi'i sort of group in Lebanon, which it judged too pragmatic and insufficiently aligned with Tehran's ideological line at the time. This created tension, Shi'i groups killing each other in 1988 in Lebanon. But they did not rupture Iran's sense of self. After the Taif Agreement in 1989, Iran recalibrated its policy. Working alongside Syria, it found ways to bring Hezbollah and Amal under a broader framework of Shi'i political representation. This was resonance. Okay, 5 minutes, that's all right. But over time, however, the routines hardened. Hezbollah became not only a resistant movement, but the central vehicle to Iran's regional identity projection. After the 2006 war, Iran basically went back to that same practice, with Hezbollah's standing surge overshadowing Amal again. And during the 2008 Beirut conflict, Hezbollah asserted itself militarily on the streets of the capital. And from 2011 onward, the rest is history, Hezbollah's intervention in Syria to basically keep Bashar Assad in power confirmed its primacy. What had once been a balance of competing Shi'i narratives narrowed into an almost exclusive reliance on one, revolutionary transnationalism embodied in Hezbollah. So this is what I basically frame as ontological trap. For Iran, this meant that the very script or narrative meant to stabilize its revolutionary self now eroded legitimacy at home and abroad. So I am going to skip this. In the paper, I went through different phases in Iran foreign policy trajectory to basically explain this empirically. But something which I just want to note here is, for me, there were one turning point which you can just pin down that trajectory, and that is the assassination of General Soleimani in 2020, January 2021. So the trap is not only regional, its consequences are felt almost quite sharply inside Iran itself. And that is the main sort of controversial claim or argument that my paper tries to make. And this is the very nature or the unique nature of Iranian Shiism. Shiism in Iran is not simply a religious doctrine, or a transnational ideology. It is a nuanced religiosity embedded in the Iranian psyche, shaped by centuries of being at the outer perimeter of the Islamic world. Unlike Arab Shiism, which is deeply tied to particular local histories in Iraq or Lebanon, Iranian Shiism evolved as part of a continuous civilization. Through language, culture, and philosophy, Iran maintained what has been called a unity in plurality, diverse peoples held together by shared civilizational self-awareness, and seen through, Hegelian lens. This gave Iran a very distinctive nationalism, one that fused faith with cultural continuity. It is this uniqueness that both the Pahlavi monarchy and the post-revolutionary state misread, albeit in opposite ways. Even if Shiite transnationalism resonated at certain moments, the rise of Hezbollah, for example, in the 1980s, mobilization during the Iraq War after 2003, in the longue durée, it has proven unstable. At home, it has created dissonance. The public increasingly perceives external commitment as alien to national identity, and that Iranian Shiism belongs within the continuity of Iran's civilization, not within a transnational projection that erodes sovereignty and drains legitimacy. I'm not going to talk about the regional backlash, which is, you are well aware of this, but just to give a little bit about the consequences of June war. So the idea for this paper basically developed before the June war for me. It's been years that I'm talking about this dichotomy or distinct sort of Shiism in Iran and in the region. And yet when I sat down to finalize this presentation, I realized every basically core point had been confirmed. I'm not claiming that I can predict future. If I could predict future, I would basically go back and buy Amazon shares, and we didn't have this basically conversation today. But the 12-day war revealed the limits of Iran's transactional repertoire. The much celebrated axis of resistance played no role. The idea of unified transnational Shi'i front, long presented as Iran's shield, was shown to be more aspirational than real. In this moment, everyone saw that the emperor was naked, and instead, Iran had to rely primarily on national capacity. This was a striking reversal of decades of narrative, where power was claimed to lie in mobilizing movement across the region. When the test came, it was national, not transnational resources that mattered. The costs were not only material, but ontological. The June 2025 war was the clearest demonstration, yet that Iran's transnational repertoire has exhausted itself. The leadership facing a muted regional front had no choice but to fall back on internal resources. What sustained the state in those days was a nationalism suffused with Shi'i Iranian valor, sacrifice, endurance, and continuity, woven into Iran's longue durée identity. People rallied around the flag, not because they saw the victories of Shi'i transnationalism, but because they felt the existential weight of defending their own homeland. And this was deterrence at its most elemental, and I can explain about the consequence of that regionally and the leadership decisions in the aftermath of that war. Sorry.
Thank you so much for your contribution, and hopefully you can cover many of these important points in the Q&A afterwards. So last but not least, we have Dr. Ahmed Abozaid. He is lecturer in international relations at the University of Chicago. He has held positions at the University of Cambridge, University of Southampton, Columbia University, and the University of St. Andrews. He has published 3 books in English, 9 books in Arabic, and over 70 peer-reviewed papers in both Arabic and English. And his forthcoming book with Oxford University Press is on the political theory of Ibn Khaldun. The title of his paper is The Clash of Asabiyat, a Neo-Khaldunian Perspective on Iranian-Israeli Rivalry in the Post-October 2023 Israeli War on Gaza. The floor is yours.
Sabah al-khair. Good morning. Thank you, Laila, for the introduction and for your time and effort to read the paper and to moderate the session. Good morning, everyone. I would like first and above all to start by thanking Professor Mahran and the Iranian Study Unit, Mu'taz, where is Mu'taz, and Fatima, thank you so much for everything you did in the last few weeks. Muchakram, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor for any scholar to work with Professor Mahran if you're familiar with his scholarship. So today, I will speak about Ibn Khaldun. No, not Ibn Khaldun, this one. No, not Ibn Khaldun, this one. Yes, this one. I'm Ibn Khaldun geek. I follow him in every Arab city to see the streets. I found it yesterday in Doha. It's in Doha new station. So I'm talking today about Ibn Khaldun. And more specifically, I will discuss Ibn Khaldun as a political theorist rather than a historian or a sociologist, as everyone is familiar with his work or his interpretation, modern interpretation. Here, I approach him as a realist, political theorist, or to use contemporary terminology through the lens of realist constructivism, and primarily as a thinker of the state, power, and conflict management. And again, I know this is not everyone cup of tea or coffee, it depends what you like. Before you throw your stones over me, this is not familiar, especially or welcome in the Arab world as well as in the West. But what I'm presenting today is traveling reading of Ibn Khaldun and interpretation, modern contemporary interpretation from the perspective of international political sociology. So, as you know, the title, as Laila said, it's a clash of asabiyat, and here I'm analyze the dynamics and repercussion of the Iranian-Israeli confrontation as Professor, U.S. President Donald Trump called the 12 Days War. The paper proposed a new analytical and theoretical framework rooted in Ibn Khaldun concept of asabiyya, a very complex, a very well-known, a very announced term with a rich interpretative range, as we will see. But to clarify some of the confusion, the vast majority, if you notice, of the paper until today, Mohammad, brilliant paper about ontological insecurity, it's state-centric, it's realism. Realism is still the dominant in the region and in the global south, while it had been outdated and abandoned in the West, which is very interesting to see the dynamics of this conversation here in the region and in the West. So here I am not talking from defensive, security-based, state-centric. I'm talking more about societal dynamics and domestic policy and power dynamics within the region or within every country. So let me start with explaining what do I mean by asabiyya in this paper. And once again, this is a political theory work, it's interpretative work, it's not literal or a Salafi reading of Ibn Khaldun. So in a previous paper I published, I counted over 35 interpretations for Ibn Khaldun asabiyya in 5 or 7 languages. And it's not the Durkheimian conception about group solidarity or group feeling. Actually, you will be amazed to see how every reading, modern reading since the 19th century until today, last year alone, Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press published 6 books about Ibn Khaldun. Over 35 interpretations, what is asabiyya? But for me, I define asabiyya as the dominant social forces. And I will start from there. It's a national spirit, it's a patriotism, and it's about elite that controls or monopolies the state or the apparatus of the state. So my argument is to put Ibn Khaldun in a conversation with contemporary political theorists. My new book about Ibn Khaldun, I put him with the canon of political theory, Charles Tilly, Max Weber, Walter Benjamin. Today I present the paper because it's about the Middle East with 2 dominant political theorists from the Anglo-Saxon, sorry, I know I have 15 minutes. So I initiate a conversation or theoretical conversation between Ibn Khaldun and Samuel Huntington and Amy Shaw. Samuel Huntington is well known enough to talk about him, so I'm not repeating, I just put the summarizing of his Clash of Civilization. But I need to clarify that I use Huntington and Shaw because they centralize normative and additional categories like tribes, civilization, culture, or non-material configuration of power. And I brought them in a conversation with Ibn Khaldun. So this is Samuel Huntington, where is like the post-Cold War conflict will not be economic or geopolitics, but more about culture and civilizational struggles within civilization, not nation state. So it's not state-centric, but it's super state. So it's like state level. And that the lines of conflict, it's not about national interest anymore, but it's about identity. And again, I'm not agreeing with that. This is not my view, but I'm just trying to bring the conversation between Ibn Khaldun and other theorists. The other one is Amy Shaw. She's a professor of, sorry, because I'm one ahead. She's a professor of law and legal studies at University of Yale, and she published this piece in 2018. So we have 1993, and we have 2018, 25 years in between. And we have Ibn Khaldun from the 14th century. So Amy Shaw claimed that the main failure of United States foreign policy during the Cold War and the aftermath, it's not the capitalist or the communist capitalist division, but actually it was overlooking, being blind for the internal dynamics and what she called the political tribal of every state that United States intervened. And she studied the case study of Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Colombia, and I think eight cases. And for her, if you talk about any efficient foreign policy or any intervention, you have to look not the state system or even the state or the system, but you have to look at the dynamics within every state. What kind of relation between the society and the political forces within any society? So for example, when you talk about Vietnam, the dominant realist interpretation, like we said today, it's because China, because Vietnam was a client for the Soviet Union and China. But actually, Vietnam was in a war with China for over 1,000 years. And actually, China occupied Vietnam for over 1,000 years. So Vietnam will never be aligned with China from this perspective. Ibn Khaldun have similar idea about the Asabiyya. And he talk about Asabiyya as a dominant force, like force majeure. It's not like something on the marginalized or peripheral, but actually it's a constitutive social forces that explain how a state is emerged, how consolidation of power is happening, and eventually how a state will decline or retreat. And I apply in my book the Asabiyya on Israel, Zionism as an Asabiyya, and in Iran now I'm claiming that the regime in Iran actually represents an Asabiyya and not a regime or an order. Again, because of the time, sorry, I need to jump. Like, for example, here, this is a summarize of the debate between Ibn Khaldun and Amy Shaw and Samuel Huntington. So here, like, for the purpose of the project, bless you, so let's see at the unit of analysis, conflict, like perception of the conflict, alliance, tribalism, and prescription for the future of the conflict. 14th century scholar from North Africa, pre-industrial, pre-Westphalian, talk about it's the social forces that define the perception of the conflict and the future of the conflict. And here, I should start by saying that the second confusion, I am not talking, when I mention Asabiyya or tribes, I'm not talking from anthropological or even traditional sociological view. This is not the Badawiyan, this is not the norm, this is not pre-modernity entities. This is a new form, hyper form. You live in the 21st century. Iran used, until now, the most advanced technologies they can use. But today, for example, Muhammad paper was about the Quranic roots. How can we make sense of this? Is this contradict, or actually it's not? Why you have to make it contradict or dichotomy, like you can be Islamist, but you can be modernist? 5 minutes, I need to stop here. I'm really sorry. So the 12 days, also my paper, and I will be happy to share it with you. I hate time table. So I identified 3 levels of analysis in international relations, so the state, the system, and the individual. So for example, in Israel, and I call it, for people who disagree with the idea of Asabiya, I call it camp, so maybe it will be accepted. So you have the hard lines, and the left and liberal Zionists, and the Arab Israel, or the Arab 48. And this is a category, I use it for every Asabiya to understand the dynamics and their views and their future about the conflict. So have the key actors and the core identity vision of the every Asabiya and their position with every, like for example, this is the extra right-wing Zionist, war for them existential necessity. So it's like you live by the sword and you die by the sword. There is no in between. We are not talking about deterrence. We are not talking about prevention. We're talking about preemption. We're talking about existential existence. Your existence is not my existence. Your surviving is not my survival. It's the security dilemma to the maximum. And you have others like the Arab Israeli, almost for over 80 years, always marginalized, weak, and away from the political dynamics that took place in Israel. And it's very interesting, most of the studies we have, no one stop and give greater attention to what exactly is the position of the Arab 48 in this war. And you will be amazed to know how different this perception. Iranian as well here, 3 major Asabiya as well, the hardliner and the moderate and the secular nationalists. And you will see we are not talking about Iran as one thing. There is no such a thing called the state speaking one language or in one tone or in one direction. This is not our ship must sail in one direction. This is not the world. It's more complex than within every state. So actually, when you look at the position with war, actually within Iran now, we still, even after the attack, it's still like, no, we need to talk. We need to negotiate with them. We need to find a middle ground to avoid this ontological trap. And I have a question for you about this. And we have the regional one, also 3, 4 camps as well. Also in the Arab world, you can't talk about, yes, you talk about Saudi Arabia and Emirates and Qatar and Egypt and Sunni versus Shia as they are unity or one thing. It's not. Even within the Sunni Arab states, they are not the same. But because of realism is outdated, I'm deeply sorry and apologize for everyone, use Walt's, deterrence, Stephen Walt. It's outdated. It's not as simple as you expected because you need to simplify the world to be able to deal with it. So that's also how I try to make it more complex to read the regional landscape as well. And finally, the global Asabiyat as well. And you will be amazed because the only person who wrote the endorsement of Amy Shaw was no one by the Vice President of the United States. Yes. And read the endorsement. It's like, I think if this guy become a president, she will be either the Home Security, like Secretary of the Home Security or the Foreign Affairs. But away from that, so still also the West is not only like the crusade or just the liberal or the left wing, or it's more complex than that. And I'm trying through the lens of Ibn Khaldun to understand how different the identity politics, the popularism, and antagonism between the different intellectual and different camps in the West. And I will stop here and can have questions. And if you are more interested about Ibn Khaldun, I can send you the paper. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abozaid. I think we'll open the floor for questions now. And again, to remind you to please ask concise questions because we don't want to keep you here too long. So Yeah, I think we can start with the front. Of course, yes. I was actually going to say if the speakers also want to comment on each other's work, you're more than welcome to do that. Maybe we can start with that really quickly, or should we? Maybe let's take a few questions and then we'll come back to you then. We'll start with the front and then go to the back.
Thank you very much. I asked a question from the first speaker. Is it possible?
Dr. Homayounvash, I think, is still with us and he can answer questions also.
Okay. As I understand from Iranian constitution, it says that Iran is a nation state and the concept of independence is vital for Iran in its constitution.
Sorry, if you can please just speak more into the mic
Yes,
so
and
he can hear.
the case that people, they had slogans during the Iranian Revolution, no East nor West Islamic Republic. It is the most important part of Iranian constitutional law and the case of Iran's foreign policy. And Iran's civilization, the history of Iran and something like that, these are issues that they are very bold in Iran's constitution. Therefore, I don't know why Dr. Mohammad they interpret from the Iranian constitution the concept of resistance. I know that there is Nafi Sabil and other Islamic values, but the most important part is the independence. Should he
Thank you so
explain
much.
for me?
Perfect, thank you. We'll take a few more questions and then we'll let the speakers answer. So I think there's one here.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and also thank the distinguished the panelists. Regarding to the point that raised by Dr. Mohammad, Homayounvash, and Dr. Kalantari, I would like to raise some comment. As you know very well that the comments, and as you know very well that since the dynasty of Al-Buye, that according to the lunar calendars started in 320 till the 1979 is approximately that 10th century. The long-term perspective of the Shiites is based on the principle of fighting against any oppression and cruelty. After the revolution is what is happening. Is this the long-term perspective or a strategy is change or continue? From my perspective, I think that after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, this long-term perspective, it means that the principle fighting against any oppression and the cruelty is continue. Logically, when the
If you can just keep it short.
clergymen come to the power after 10th century and take official the power, it should be that maintenance, the status quo, the policy. But you can see this policy and this long-term perspective is continue as a before. Why? Because they feel after the revolution, the manifestation of the oppression and manifestation of the cruelty will be there in an international system. And as it rated by the Dr. Mohammad, that by virtue of the Article 152, that our Constitution emphasizes of the rejection, any domination, and any that's subjective. So I think in the wrap-up, in my personal view, the strategy of the Shiites in all the history from the Alebuya till today's is never ever changed because it's based on fight with any that's the oppression and the cruel strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any more questions we have here, Doctor? Yes.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the speakers. I must say this is one of the most brilliant panels that I've been to and heard in a long time. I think the next move is for Mahran to bring people together to have a volume on what would be called Iranian grand strategy. That's a contribution to the literature along the lines of that volume by Thierry Balzac and Ron Krebs, because we do need those kinds of engagements, and I think Ahmed should be more vocal in your critique. Mohammad, I have a thought that if you can help me really think through. There's tension in the argument that seems to adopt methodological really nationalism and anchors itself in IR's really realism, and I agree with Ahmed, is a bit really problematic, that really starts from the ontological really security of sociologists that thought to look at the individual. So anthropomorphizing the state in that sense and relying on thinking about it as a unit comes across as really problematic as you seek to tell us about the tensions with society, the movement. Is there a way, and I would think, could you help me appreciate the work more if we move away from the paradigms, if we go back to the ideas of sociology? So I think there's more really to say that about really problematizing the state. I think the first really speaker says it, so the literature on narratives in foreign policy, narratives and rivalry are really brilliant ways of thinking about it. So could you help us really think about ontological security, not from an IR paradigmatic and not from the Midzen really variety, or I think Aisha Zareko or others who also spoke of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we had a question here in the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I have a question to Mr. Mohammad Kalantari. You spoke about the security dilemmas and identity politics and in the foreign policy. Yet, when you spoke or you gave an example of U.S. foreign policy, you framed it in a way that was a bit positive to the U.S. I mean, even though they lost a lot of money and had a lot of setbacks in both Iraq and Afghanistan, you still framed it in a sort of like a beneficial way to the U.S. Yet, when you spoke about Iran's foreign policy, and because of the rigid identity routines, you framed it in a way that it had an ontological trap. And I was wondering why you read them in different ways. And just a short or a small comment, not on this panel, but the panel before, there was a gentleman who declared that Israel can live peacefully with us, and it was a sort of a push for normalization. As a student here, I think I speak on behalf of all of us. We reject this statement, and we do not accept it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that we can take? Yes, we have one here in the back, and then we'll come back to you.
السلام عليكم. My question will be in Arabic. عندما ننظر إلى السياسة الخارجية.
We look at the Iranian foreign policy when to the second panelist. When we look at the Iranian foreign policy and we want to provide a theoretical framework, it will be the theory of new realism, which Shadman speaks about this, but his description of this foreign policy says that these countries which want to follow this approach, they have to have hegemonic at the regional level, and there shouldn't be other rivals. Here we're talking about Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Can we say that this Iranian foreign policy and what's happening to Iran as a result of all the changes is a consequence of Iran's foreign policy itself? سنأخذ سؤال آخر ثم نترك الحديث.
سؤالي للدكتور محمد كالانتاري. أنت تحدثت أن هناك يعني النفوذ الإيراني في سوريا ولبنان كان يعبر عن ممارسات للهوية الثورية في هذه الدول أو المناطق، وأن حزب الله كان أبرز تجلي لآلية إبراز الهوية الإيرانية. هل ممكن أن نفهم أو تتوسع في هذه النقطة كيف يعني هل هذا جزء من السياسة والاستراتيجية الإيرانية الخارجية.
strategy and or what is it exactly? Thank you.
Have about 2 to 3 minutes to answer. We can start with Dr. Homayounvash, since he's joining us online. And if you also would like to comment on each other's papers, you're more than welcome to do so.
Thank you so much, Leila, and thank you for the questions. So I think the first question, to refresh our memory, was whether there is a contradiction between independence and these resistance networks that Iran has cultivated, because one implies self-sufficiency, the other entanglement. But I think if you look at the Constitution more holistically, in terms of its framework, these two concepts actually reinforce each other, because supporting movements abroad is viewed as protecting Iran's independence at home, and fulfilling that obligation, the Quranic obligation, to help out the oppressed. So independence is preserved not through isolation. Like Iran is not going to become, an autistic state like North Korea, if that's like the concept of independence that we have in mind. But by anchoring Iran in a transnational ethos of resistance, it will prevent domination and project a sense of deterrence. I think a more isolationist, completely inward-looking concept of independence is inherently at odds with Iran's geography, the type of threat environment that it's dealing with, and just the sort of strategic vicinity of the country. But I also had a quick comment on the other Mohammad's paper on cognitive dissonance or ontological dissonance. I think perhaps to resolve this seeming concept of deterrence, perhaps we should use the frame of heroic flexibility, like adaptation without surrendering ontological integrity. And I think this notion of ontological integrity perhaps is much more helpful than using it as this concept of ontological trap, because compromise without preserving identity, for example, capitulation, is existentially intolerable from that perspective. And this perhaps explains why Iran sometimes resists, even when material costs seem prohibitively too high, and you expect Iran to capitulate and to be more compromising. But I think this notion of ontological integrity is key to understanding that type of behavior. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. The other Dr. Mohammed, do you want to answer?
Okay, quite briefly. I can start with Mohammed's comments and link it with this. I didn't. When I was trying to explain what's the difference between ontological dissonance and trap, I brought the idea of US and war on terror on that. But what you are saying, Mohammed, is from what we can understand from the ground, this heroic flexibility, so on and so forth, is translated as tactical sort of projection. So when we are under attack over our identity questions, we set back. So yesterday, there were questions asking from Dr. Khatibzadeh saying that, okay, how you are going to guarantee that this regional dialogue that you are offering as Iranian sort of extending to the neighbors in the other side of Persian Gulf is going to work this time around. And that resonated with me, thinking about back in 2001 it was, when Iran received this threat by the rise of neocons in the US. They reached out to Saudi Arabia to establish this security accord with Saudi Arabia. But 2 years later, when 2003 happened, the whole idea of the hell went loose in Iraq, and the rivalry started. So this tactical sort of going back and forth doesn't really substitute, or we cannot justify it based on, it's a contrary to capitulation. So we don't want to capitulate, so we show heroic flexibility. And that brings me back to your comment as well. What you were explaining, which was correct, I absolutely agree, is exactly the same ontological trap that I'm talking about. Then to justify our modern sort of policy making in the Middle East, we had to go back to the 4th century. That shows that how we are like kind of our reservoir is depleted, because that ontological trap, as I was explaining, because it is, and this is really interesting to bring ontological security terminology back to the fore. It's as if a self is battling with itself, that it is really hard to come up and be creative, to boldly recalibrate. Yeah, so maybe we were wrong, or maybe I was wrong. So what? Let's be more practical. And I'm using this paradigm. I understand this, that it's always hard for us to bring theory, because my main claim is this is not specific to Iran. This is not specific to the Middle East. We are using that lexicon of theory and paradigm, Aisha Zarakol, as you said, Brent Steele, or Mitzen, because I believe that the case in the Middle East has much to offer to the broader academia in the West to even go and develop that theory. So I'm basically searching for a common language. There were 2 more questions. I don't know if I have answered,
I think
time
maybe
to answer, or
you
we can just
answer them over lunch.
Yes,
so we can
obviously.
give Dr. Abozaid the time
Sorry,
to
they pay me at the university to talk, so this is why I always have to
thank you so much. This
automatically
is,
brag
this is all
about
great.
it.
But I have if you have something to add, please feel free.
Because
I
we
have,
need
I
to.
have many things
we
to add.
need
I mean,
to
don't
wrap
worry
up.
about it.
You can answer, and then we'll come back if we have more.
Thank God I don't have questions, so I don't have questions, but I have comments. I have comments. Maybe, hopefully in the future, if you develop in the paper or you work on it, and Mohammad, the other Mohammad as well. So I will start with you since you are here. Besides the epistemic and methodological comments from Professor Ahmed, I was interested actually about the language you use, or the methodological language, the scholarly language. Like, about this ontological trap, would that true or accurate to use as a term, or to apply before the 12 days or the 7th of October? Because if you go back to trace Iranian strategy since 2003, that was not a trap. That was not a self-defeat. That was regional hegemony. That was dominance. So what happened here, right? The second one, very brief. How about Iranian overstretched?
Yeah.
Right? It's not ontological defeat. It's overstretched for over 25 years, and now fatigue. And you use a word like war fatigue, right? So also, not to replace this with that, but put it in a conversation. Maybe this is a contribution, we can add it to the securitization theory.
So,
right?
So this is why I use ontological trap in line with security dilemma of influence.
Yes.
Okay, so that part is referring to that overextension. But it is, big disclaimer, nobody knows, I am Iranian, so it's always quite hard for me to think about foreign policy of Iran and understand, I mean, in every single, I mean, hope those diplomats, I mean, like kind of, I'm happy to talk about this. I mean, I've been talking about this. It's always a day late, a penny short, okay? So if we have like kind of this idea which Said yesterday mentioned, that, okay, so what? Why do we need Bashar Assad in 2013? Yeah, let's have a transition. Yeah, so, and then we still remain, or Iran still remain popular. So I would still, you know, for the sake of Asabiya, still like kind of dabbling down on that ontological trap, but obviously we can talk about this, as Leila mentioned, over the
wrap up. If you have one quick
One
comment,
last
very quick
yes,
comment.
to the first Muhammad, yes. And just quick comment in Arabic as well. الواقعية الهجومية مش for
The offensive realism is a systematic theory. It's not foreign policy. So therefore, you have to be aware when you use it as a theory, it's not a theory. It's not a foreign policy. شبلي التلحمي ستأتي محمد. أنا أنتهي هنا أيضا مرة أخرى. سأحاول تطوير الورقة.
Do you have any critique or strategic, since you use term strategic culture, or strategic evaluation of this discourse about the Quranic strategy? Second one.
You said one.
How to, yes, it is.
Okay.
Related to that, how to make sense or how to differentiate between realist, as he used later on, and the so-called Quranic culture. Is it just a surface to overshadow the theorist?
I think we really need
I'm
to
done.
stop because they're giving me signs
But thank
over
you.
there.
And
Thank
I
you so
can-
much to all of you. And lunch is served over there. We have an hour, and then we come back for panel 6. Okay? Thank you so much.